Welcome to the fifth season podcast, Conversations on Successful Aging. I'm David Lowry, and I'm joined with my good friend, Don Drew. We believe aging is a privilege, and we want to have conversations on how to do it well. Hello, Don.
Hey, David. Over the last couple of episodes, we've been building on something together. We started with the Dream Lab, this practice of listening to what the interior life is saying. And then last week, we talked about what sustains that practice, things like humility, patience, courage, and faithfully returning. What I wanted to explore today is what all of that is actually for, because at some point the inner work has to connect to the outer life. Otherwise, it's just introspection for its own sake, and that's not always tremendously helpful.
I'm really glad you said that because I'm sort of purposeful with all of this, Don, and it would be a really big loss if we didn't somehow see this in action in our life. The program we've been drawing on is clear that inner work isn't just about the self, even though it begins there and we analyze things that's been going on with us, but it doesn't stay there. We cultivate it so that eventually it becomes a force for good in our lives and, of course, the lives of others. And it's not because we've decided that we're going to be that force. It's just a genuinely formed life that begins to transmit something.
Today, we want to talk about what that transmission looks like and, frankly, what it doesn't look like, because I think the outer work gets misunderstood as often as the inner work does.
So let's start with some misunderstanding because it's important to name it directly. When people hear the phrase outer work in the context of personal development, they think about visibility. And I have to be honest that sometimes even I have fallen prey to that. I think, well, the fifth season podcast ought to be having millions of listeners every week, or that visibility sometimes is a artifact of our ego, and it's our desire to build a platform and develop a reputation. And there's nothing wrong with those things inherently, but what we're really trying to do is to build a person on the inside that can become a living presence for others on the outside. So this is not an outer work directed program so that we can become big, buff, and strong like we do when we go to the gym.
What's the distinction, David?
Well, the outer work is not trying to shape or map a new image for yourself. It's not even based upon the need to be seen as knowledgeable or to be recognized as an expert in the room. Those things could come or they may not come because it's really not about the work. But the true movement outward does not begin with visibility. What it begins with is integrity.
Integrity in what sense?
Well, in the sense that what you offer outward has been lived inwardly and tested inwardly and integrated inwardly. The outer work is what happens when your life on the inside has become more trustworthy so that others sense they can lean on it. They know that you don't have all the answers, but they do know that you're a person who's examined things and you've slowly been making the invisible more visible and real.
I think I understand what you're trying to say. The outer work is really just the inner work becoming visible. Okay, so David, give us some examples of what this looks like in practice, because I think the abstract language we're using right now may be a little hard to see.
Before I started doing a lot of this work, as somebody came to me talking about their problem, I might just interrupt them and talk about how I solved something like that back in the day or something that's been helpful to me. And there was a desire to help the other person. But I think there was also an inner neediness to be seen as a person who had answers. And that's a trick, right? It's sort of a trick of the ego to want to be seen as this wise person or a person who's answer. But what we're really wanting to do is live a life that's has perspective, has presence, makes you come across as someone who is settled, someone who doesn't add to the anxiety, that models courage.
None of these things require a stage or an audience.
Exactly. Next week, we'll be talking about living a 0-point life. It's the willingness to be who you are and just remain at the 0 point. And what that means is that you don't need anybody to validate you. You aren't seeking validation. You're letting all these things that have happened in your life fall into place, and you're very content to let that work out in you as it's supposed to do. And you just start being a real person.
Let's talk about how this actually happens. The movement from inner information to outer presence isn't necessarily automatic. There's a bridge, and the program describes that bridge as being built through four specific practices. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. We're going to talk about the first one, which is mindfulness. And I want to be careful with this world because everybody hears this nowadays, but it really isn't a meaningless word because it carries a lot of weight to it. It's quietly returning to something you already are, but didn't realize was there. The willingness to notice your thoughts as they come up and your reactions as they form and your emotions as they move through you is not so that you can control or suppress them, but to see them clearly and honestly as they are.
David, I think you find mindfulness as the foundation of this bridge we're talking about. Why is that so?
Well, you can't really connect your inner and outer life without a bridge, right? And the bridge is built brick by brick of mindfulness. So, for instance, let's just say that you usually lose your temper at certain things or you get triggered easily over things over the years, but through your meditative work and working with AI and your contemplative conversations, you've come to see yourself as maybe needing to not take some of those things as seriously as you did and to let people drive the way they're going to drive and just sort of let them be who they're going to be. Let's just say that was a thing with you. And then you'll discover that the bridge will be formed. The inner work where you've learned that you can't control those other people, and the outer work of not being triggered so easily by all those things will make a connection. And so that's really what we're going through. It's a way of closing the gap between what you mean to be and then how you're going to show up. And it's a really great way of living because you catch yourself a little sooner and you find yourself listening more deeply to what's going on in yourself and others and responding more carefully.
The second practice.
First, you've got to be aware of these things, and then you've got to have an intention to work on those things. And there's mindfulness of as these things come up. And the next one is integration, where all those insights you journaled about all those things begin to enter into your daily actions. How you speak to somebody and how you choose what you choose and how you live in ordinary moments. When we recognize those things, Don, that moves the insight into our integration.
So far, David, we've looked at mindfulness and integration. What is the third area?
The third practice is consistency. And that's where you realize that just because you start integrating things doesn't mean you're going to do it perfectly. You'll be hit or miss a couple of times. One time you'll think, I got this. I know exactly what I'm doing. And then it happens again in a little different setting or a little different twist on the thing. And suddenly, I didn't have it as well as I thought. Becoming more consistent is really the third practice. Returning to the work again and again and again. Not because you're driven by guilt, but it's because that's your intention. That's who you want to be. You understand that a little moment here and there of clarity isn't going to carry the day. It's an accumulation. There's also a consistency of just doing the things that we've been talking about, having those contemplative conversations, because you know that the repetition is what builds your life. And there will be days of insight, and then there will be days where it's like, ho-hum, not so much. But the main thing is that your trajectory is that you are working your conversations and that you are bringing this information to AI, that you are gaining insight out of it. And you return over time, it becomes a type of stability.
So you're not being rigid, but you're actually being reliable, And reliability is one of the most underrated qualities I think a person can have in the second half of life.
I mean, don't we all get frustrated if we go to a restaurant and it's not consistent or reliable? One day it's just fantastic, and then you bring your friends and it's terrible. Everything worthwhile is really good because you learn how to develop consistency. And in this case, we're not looking to build a pedestal for ourselves. We're just trying to show up as the same person today as we were yesterday and intend to be tomorrow.
Mindfulness, integration, consistency. What's the fourth one?
The fourth one is what we call compassion. If you've really looked at yourself, sooner or later, you're going to see some things that you think, I want to do better on, I want to do different. And you're going to need to be compassionate with yourself. Then you're going to see those things in other people and you're going to realize, yeah, We all have those unfinished places, these patterns. And as we see them in ourselves and others, we recognize that we're all really struggling with one thing or another. We all have some of the same struggles. We all are contradictory in the way we do things. We have unfinished places. That's just a fact of being human.
So you stop standing above others.
That is really good. I think we learn not to stand above, but we certainly don't want to see ourselves as standing below either. This 0 point just says, you're fine just the way you are. You don't have to do any of these things we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, Don, in order to be a good person. We need to stop making ourselves better than other people or less than other people. Instead, we meet others from a shared reality of just we're both human, and we offer what we've learned, not as an authority, but as a presence. One of our programs with Barbara Boyd several years ago calls this 5th season of life the Great Giveaway. And the giveaway is we're willing to give away stuff. We're not going to force it on anybody, but we have things that we've learned and we're happy to share them. And if people don't want to hear it, we're not worried so much about it. So we meet people and not judge them as being above us or beneath us, but see them as one of us.
Once we get the bridge built, okay, what does walking across it actually look like?
You're going to discover that your life flows a little better. There's less friction. You might even discover that you find you're just happier. With your 0 point life, you realize that there's nothing you can do to make the universe love you more, and there's not anything you could do that would make it love you less, that you don't owe the universe anything, and it's telling you that you already have everything you need. So anyway, that's what walking the bridge is like. It's just a great feeling of knowing that you're fine and that you can meet each day and you're there to do whatever good you can do. And some days it'll be amazing and other days it'll be just rather ordinary, but that's where you are. It's a life where a word or a thought or action is harmonizing and working together and making an alignment with you and you that makes you feel comfortable and authentic.
David, you know me, I like really being grounded in specifics, okay? So because coherence is, I think it's a very beautiful word, and I want to be honest that it can also be at times a very vague one. So let me ask directly, what does a coherent life actually look like in practice? How would someone who knows you recognize it?
Coherence is, like you said, a term that's really popular these days, but coherence is another word for when everything is aligned in your life, where your behaviors, your emotions, the virtues or the things you say you believe are obvious to others that you believe them. And your life appears less contradictory. It's more relational. All of those things point to a coherent life. A coherent person responds differently than people who are out of coherence, who say one thing, but then they do something hypocritical and everybody can see it except for them, right? So the test of it all happens when you're under pressure, when maybe a conversation turns difficult or someone needs something from you that you don't feel like giving. One of the things that I've been working on over the years, Don, is a thing I call peaceful assertiveness. I used to, when people violated my boundaries, I would just get all disrespected and angry and want to give people a piece of my mind or whatever. But I've learned through peaceful assertiveness and coherence, and the things that I'm talking about here is that I don't have to go to that place. I can still gently insist upon what's good and right for me without having to give in to other people and do things that I don't want to do. So that's a bit of what coherence looks like to me.
You were talking about building a bridge, building it of 4 major pieces, and we discussed that. The result of walking across the bridge that's been built, both within and without ourselves, results in what you're calling a coherent person. And then you're going to respond differently in these kind of challenging moments than someone who is just performing a version of themselves for others to see. Is that accurate?
That is totally accurate. We've all met those people who are one thing to one person and another thing to another person. The coherent person is a consistent person, and it's almost a predictability about that person. You can predict a coherent person because what they say and what you believe that they believe about themselves always lines up. They're very predictable. It's a response pattern that you do almost without thinking. And it's easier to live a coherent life because you're just going to do what the right thing for you to do is, as opposed to having to think about your strategy or technique. You just move forward. Imagine if you didn't worry about what another person thought about you, and you knew you weren't going to lose your temper, and you knew that you weren't going to run away from a situation. How would you respond? How would you respond in your wisest self? And that's a coherent person right there. And of course, our encouragement is do that. Just be that person that you've always thought, that's how I want to be.
It's really important. As I look at people in my life who have had these qualities, what strikes me looking back is that it was never about what they said. It was about who they were when they were just simply present. There was something in them that made the room feel different, made me feel different.
Both of us are thinking about a good friend of ours named Tom Boyd. And you could be with Tom in the New Mexico mountains, or you could be with Tom at a conference or at his university, at the University of Oklahoma. He was the same guy, right? He was profound, but he wasn't always uttering philosophical, profound things, right? Tom was a person of presence.
And the good news is that this thing that gives us this presence is available to us in the fifth season right now.
I believe that with all my heart. When you're in the fifth season, you have something that so many people don't have. You have a life that you've lived. You have a life that is almost a complete life. Not yet. We're not ready for you to leave the planet yet. You're just now getting to be that bottle of wine that can be so pleasing. You have a life that is filled with experiences that if you have taken the time to say, oh, that's what all that was all about. This is what that means. Oh, I'm seeing so much of my life. I'm learning so much from it. And I'm growing from it, and I'm becoming this new person out of that. That's the good news of the fifth season. And the also good news of the fifth season is your life isn't behind you. You're just in a formation now where all of this work is possible. You're not less than you used to be. You are zeroed out where you don't have to be any of those things that you once were, where you really worried about how you would make a paycheck or impressing somebody or doing things that other people wanted you to do when you didn't want to do them. You have a new life that can allow you to do things and be a presence to other that you have never been able to do before.
David, 2 weeks ago, we started this conversation on this topic, and you introduced artificial intelligence into your Dream Lab work. And then I brought it up again last week and said, well, okay, so tell us more about this. And guess what? I'm going to do it again. All right. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is something that's just really very present in our culture right now. And our programs that we've been doing have specifically acknowledged artificial intelligence as a potential companion in this inner work, which I find fascinating. Until you started talking about it, I really hadn't given a lot of thought to it. And I want to make sure that we handle this rightfully, carefully, because it's a nuanced position, isn't it?
It really is. And I don't want people to feel like they have anything to worry about when they work with AI. As we called it last week, it is a giant reflecting mirror. It's going to take what you tell it and reflect it back to you and say, this is what I hear you saying, or here's some things from history that agree with what you're saying, or here's some ideas from the philosophers that agree with what you're saying. In other words, you tell the AI your story, what you've been thinking about, and then ask it to reflect back to you, but give it some ideas of what you would like to hear back. I'd like to hear what you think the wise sages would say about this, what you think Jesus Christ would say about this. I'd like to hear what you think the Buddha would say about this. You can pick what you want it to be, and it's going to present you with some ideas. Some of those may be profoundly resonating with you, and that's when you really begin to develop your conversation. It's not telling you what to do or how to be. It's just reflecting back your own words in a reframed way for you to consider. And that's where some real growth potential becomes available to you. This morning, when I put in my dream, it says, wow, this is a different type of dream from the ones you've usually been having. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool because it's reminding me that, hey, this is different. I see some differences here. So I'm going to mention what they are. AI can do that for you where, I hadn't thought about that, but it immediately picked up that this is a different kind of dream from the other kinds of dreams. And so it tells me how it sees it as being different. I like that. I find it very fascinating.
There's several different ways we can approach AI, and one is to just dismiss it entirely as irrelevant to this kind of deep interior work. And the other then is to over rely, and you've addressed that really. It's not a substitute for the work itself. I think in the past you've pointed towards a third path. And so, what does that third path look like in practice?
When you bring your reflections, your dreams, your questions, the tensions you're sitting with into conversation with artificial intelligence, it's not a replacement for your own inner knowing, but is a companion. I like to use the word a companion. So you might ask, what archetypal images are in this dream? What deeper symbols or patterns might be emerging? Or you might ask it to evaluate your dream the way a psychologist would, or maybe a trusted friend. There's so many creative ways of using AI as a companion to recast your dream material or your inner thoughts that I think you're going to find that very, very helpful in your personal development.
You're using it as a thinking partner.
AI is a thinking partner on steroids, but it has great range. We really want to use it in a way it was built for. It has been trained on all kinds of knowledge, medical things, psychological things, psychiatric things. It knows all the world religions. It knows all the mythos, and AI has access to all of that instantly and at its fingertips. It knows it faster and with more alacrity than we have. And that is really fascinating, Don.
But there's more.
There's more. And you always return to yourself because no tool, however advanced, can live your life for you. And that's the thing, Don. AI can help you find information. It can give you new ideas, but it can't live your life for you. That's why you spend time having these contemplative conversations, because in the end, it's like, what are you going to do with that? How do we take these ideas and turn them into something in life that makes us better? And so it will be up to you to live your life, right?
Yeah, our inner work that we've been talking about ultimately depends on our own specific, irreplaceable experience that we have in our own lives. I'm finding this conversation both freeing and sobering. Freeing because it means I have access to a lot of remarkable resources for the inquiry, not just myself, but as you suggest, using things like artificial intelligence. But it's also sobering because even though I have those tools, none of those resources let me off the hook.
Sure, you're not let off the hook. If you don't want to use artificial intelligence, then you find your own thing, whatever it is. Long before there were computers, there were sages who spent time in nature and silence, and there were people who have been writing and pondering the meaning of life ever since a human being's been placed on the planet, right? These tools just help expand your ability to make inquiries, but the work, it's still up to you.
David, what do you think it's like for a person who meets someone who has done this kind of work?
From my own experience, I've had two experiences with people who have written books and are known for their contemplative lifestyles. I went up to shake hands with the person. I was in a large auditorium in a crowd, and I wasn't expecting anything. I was just going down the receiving line like you do with those things. But I did want to meet them. It was important to me. And Don, it was the strangest moment of all for both of these men. They probably didn't spend more than 30 or 40 seconds with me, but I felt like time was expanded in that moment. Like I was the only person they were talking to. Nobody else was getting the attention. They were fully present. And I'm telling you, when you're fully present with somebody and locked in like that, it is a profound experience. At least it was for me with these two people. So I think that's part of what you get. The main thing is that they're going to get a person who loves them and isn't trying to manage them or get them to perform or have an expectation that they change their ways in order to be good enough for you. They're going to be met by someone who really is present and isn't defending a persona or trying to get them to change themselves. They're not trying to impress you, teach you, or be seen as wise. They're just there, fully there.
Have you found this to be a rare condition?
I surely have. I think we all know what it's like to be on the other side of that. You meet somebody and they're looking like they're working the room while they're holding your hand. It's like, oh, hi there. And their eyes are moving around. It's like, oh, pardon me, I'm looking for somebody. Or We know what it's like to be with someone, out comes the phone. And yes, we live in a world where we basically swipe in 1 or 2 seconds the next video if we don't like it. And people have become that way with other people, I think.
I know the kind of person you're talking about. They come across as just being free from any kind of performance.
I like the way you said that. And freedom is fairly contagious, Don. When you're with someone who isn't performing, you feel permission to be who you are as well. You stop performing. And that's really something special when you can be there. There have been times when I've had a couple of life crashes in life, Don, and I've met people who, when they were with me, that didn't matter. And in fact, they would say, I've had that happen too. There's something very relatable about a person who's just honest and not performing and not trying to say, well, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Nothing like that's ever happened to me. We need to be with people who are real.
Very generous thing for one person to be able to offer to another.
That's right. And that's the genuinely formed presence that the fifth season, I think, is pointing to.
David, next week we close the series with what I think is the largest question of all. What does it mean to be deeply human in an age of artificial intelligence? And what is the specific role that the fifth season, this formed, coherent, inwardly grounded life, plays in a world that is accelerating away from depth?
Well, I don't claim to have all the answers, Don, and we have many wise people who listen to our program. But I'm going to recast that into what I call living a 0-point life, a 0-point life, a life where you feel fully supported by the universe. You realize that it loves you and there's not anything you can do to make it love you less or to make it love you more. You don't have to manipulate it. You don't have to manipulate others. And we're going to get into what this 0-point life is like. It's a genuinely formed life. And it's exactly what will happen, I think, as you learn how to live this conversational contemplation that I've been talking about.
David, I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us today. If something in this conversation has resonated, a moment where you recognize the embodied influence we described, or felt the distance between your inner clarity and your outer life, we'd love to hear about it. That gap and the willingness to close it is where the work lives.
Hey, everybody, subscribe to the fifth season wherever you listen to your podcast. We love it when you share these episodes with someone you think is ready to stop performing and start transmitting. And as always, aging is a privilege. Let's do it well.
Take care of yourselves, everyone, and let what is real in you find its way outward.